Hi, welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. Today we wind up our in-depth look at the Beach Boys' Holland album. There's a lot to get to, so much so in fact that, as I mentioned last week, this week I'm posting not only this part 2 episode, but like a bonus EP, a mini episode entitled 194.1, The Geography of California Saga. I hope you'll check that out after you've watched this. Also, as I did last week, I've posted some of the new and notable albums that you might have seen on sale in the record store had you walked in to purchase a copy of the Holland album on the day of its release. So let's get started right away with side 2 of the album, which kicks off with a cheery hi from Jonah Wilson, Carl's 3-year-old son. It helps in creating an informal family feel similar to Paul McCartney's first solo album. It also might be useful in deflating any feeling of pretension that might come from the lyrics that follow. Carl Wilson and Jack Riley had created 2 great songs for Surf's Up, Long Promised Road and Feel Flows. Now on Holland, The Traitor made it 3. Lyrically, of course, it deals with colonialism, imperialism, and racism, featuring socially conscious perspectives that were so much a part of music in the early 70s. Musically, the first section is strong and confident. It sounds great and befits the hubris of the Traitor's words. It also continues the water and waterways theme of the album, with sailed being the second word in the lyric. Where the song really takes off, and what makes it memorable to me is the second section, the part that begins with making it softly. It's much more ethereal than the first part of the song, and the theme of perseverance comes up again with lines like reason to live, reason to continue. One reading of the lyric is that these are the words of the oppressed, following the words of the oppressors in the first part of the song. And Carl delivers one of his finest vocal performances putting it across. In his introduction to the reissue of Holland on compact disc in the year 2000, as a twofer with Carl and the Passions, Tom Petty wrote, "The Traitor is, well, something of a miracle. The Traitor may be the best piece of work ever by a man who did many, many great vocals. The Traitor is the centerpiece to Holland, and all these years later, still leaves me with my mouth hung open whenever I hear it." I certainly wouldn't disagree with Tom Petty on any of that. It's another excellent track and a great way to kick off side 2. By this time, a common practice in album sequencing was to put the weakest material in the middle of side 2, and that's the case with Holland. Of course, with the Holland album, weakest is a very relative term because taken on their own, they're both pretty excellent tracks. First up is Leaving This Town, which is generally thought of as Blondie and Ricky's song on this album, though Carl and Mike share writing credits. According to the liner notes on the CD reissue in 2000, it was recorded in Los Angeles after the group returned from Holland. In other sources, Blondie offers memories of having to stop recording it while trains passed by the studio in Holland, so I'm not sure which is correct. Lyrically, this, and Only With You, lack the dense imagery of the rest of the album and depart from the water theme. Leaving This Town definitely carries on the determination and perseverance theme. Like Here She Comes from Carl and the Passions, Leaving This Town, at least as it starts, sounds more like Traffic, or in this case maybe Elton John tracks like The King Must Die, than it does the Beach Boys. I love the choruses, especially the musical hook in the When Your Friends Have All Gone part. And on the choruses, you get fantastic Beach Boy backing vocals. This is where it does sound like the Beach Boys, but not in any retro nostalgic way. They sound completely modern. It's the sound I craved from the early 70s Beach Boys, and we get it on those choruses and again in the final fade. At 5 minutes and 36 seconds, it's the longest track on the album, coming in about 35 seconds longer than The Traitor. The instrumental break runs roughly 1 minute and 40 seconds, about the total length of some early Beach Boys songs. Of course, long solos were a hallmark of early 70s rock albums, so this would have sounded modern and progressive. Anyway, I don't mind it at all. I'm glad it's not in a hurry, and strangely, it doesn't feel like the longest track on the album. As I was reviewing Holland for these episodes, I kind of felt like I rediscovered Leaving This Town. Maybe it's because it's a track I didn't know was backwards and forwards to some of the other stuff on the album. It's a track that I kept returning to as I was putting these together. Great stuff from Blondie and Ricky, who really shine on their lead vocals, a great arrangement, and great backing vocals from the group. Next up is Only With You. It's a gentle, relatively simple song by Dennis with gentle, relatively simple lyrics by Mike. Though we often think of Dennis and Mike as being at odds during these years, they did occasionally co-write a song. In addition to Only With You, there was of course Sound of Free and the title track from Pacific Ocean Blue. It stands in contrast to the other songs on the album as a straightforward love song. Carl said the backing track was recorded in less than 2 hours and that his lead vocal was done in a single take. Strings, which of course were so prevalent on Dennis's contributions to Carl and the Passions, were overdubbed later in LA. That also gives the track a slightly different, more polished, less rustic feel from the rest of the album. It's a gentle, effective track that works along the same lines as Forever, though I would say not quite as memorably. An alternate version of Only With You was released on the Legacy edition of Pacific Ocean Blue in 2008. It's got a Dennis Wilson lead vocal and a more spare, piano-driven arrangement. I know a lot of fans have said they prefer that version. What I like most about Dennis's version is in the second half of the song. I prefer the way he sings the coda. He doesn't hit the ending of the line so hard. All I want to do, ooh, is spend my life with you, ooh. Yes, it's true, ooh. I think Dennis's version sounds more subtle and natural. Also, for me, the strings get a little syrupy at the end of the Holland version, so I prefer the way the more spare Dennis version concludes. Of course, I'm happy to have a Carl version and a Dennis version. Both versions work, and I'm sure out there somewhere, somebody has taken the first half of that Carl Beach Boy version and put it together with the second half of that Dennis version, creating possibly the best of both. As we mentioned earlier, Dennis had submitted another song, Carry Me Home, for the album, and it was rejected. It strikes me that a Dennis song that would have really worked on Holland is River Song, which was written with Carl around this time. Of course, we know the song from Dennis's 1977 Pacific Ocean Blue album. It might have been written just slightly too late for Holland. Of course, the Beach Boys played it in concert in the early 70s. The earliest documented performance I've been able to find is November 22, 1972, after Holland was completed, but before it was released. In the Rustin and Stebbins Beach Boys in Concert book, George Heehan recalls both River Song and We Got Love being performed at 2 shows at DAR Constitution Hall in Washington, D.C. on that date. A Beach Boys version of River Song on Holland would have nicely fit the river theme established by Steamboat and California Saga, as well as the overall theme of water on the album, making it feel more like a concept album. Imagine it in place of Only With You, or even closing out the album after Funky Pretty. I think the punch it delivered would have lifted the album to even higher heights. Of course, whether it was written too late or not, I have never heard of it being in consideration for the album, so it was never going to happen, but somewhere in a parallel universe, that would have made a great addition. Closing out the album is a Brian Mike composition with additional lyrics by Jack Riley. Funky Pretty also stands apart from the other tracks on the album in a good way. Like Only With You, it's a love song, but a distinctly more upbeat love song. So the album's Perseverance theme is missing, as is the water theme, unless you count the references to Pisces Lady. Pisces, of course, being a water sign, which accounts for the daughter of Neptune reference. I noticed that astrology, along with meditation and ecology, seems to be a hippie pursuit that Mike could get behind. As Mike has pointed out, the Pisces Lady is Tamara Fitch, his third wife and the mother of their daughter Summer Love, who was born on January 31, 1973, about 3 weeks after Holland was released. The song is loosely based on Brian's instrumental, Spark in the Dark, recorded on January 21, 1972, and released on the Sail on Sailor box set in 2022. Brian played bass, and according to Blondie Chaplin, it was Brian who got the voices together and ended up giving it a rough mix. Brian also provided the synthesizer that gives the track its cool, slightly otherworldly feel. This seems to be the one track on Holland in which Brian was really involved. It's fun, it's upbeat, and it's good. If you hadn't heard the Beach Boys since 1966, this is what you might have hoped they would sound like in 1973. With its upbeat mood and lead vocals from most of the band, it's a great closer for the album. If, like me, you've come to the conclusion that no Beach Boy album is really complete without something weird, you got it in the form of a bonus EP that originally came taped to the back of the album, something like this. You can still see the tape residue here on the album and the EP. Of course, it's the fairy tale Mount Vernon and Fairway. Brian wrote it at his home in Holland with a little help later on from Carl and Jack Riley. While writing it, Brian listened repeatedly to Randy Newman's recent album Sail Away because it kept him in the right frame of mind. This is a great album, but listening to it in the relatively low light of Holland, especially after a lifetime spent in sunny Southern California, really makes it amazing that we ended up with anything as cheery as Mount Vernon and Fairway. I've seen it variously reported that Brian wrote it out either using kids' rubber stamp letters or kids' sticker letters. That may be the case, or it may be a case of a little embellishment for some Jack Riley myth-making. In any case, Brian maybe should have listened to Sail Away a little longer or had more stamps or stickers on hand because the fairy tale seems a little unfinished. Jack Riley reportedly tried to bring it all together by adding to the narrative, but even in the final version, the story doesn't seem to resolve. The kids never find the hidden transistor radio, though they hear a sound that might be the return of the Pied Piper or just the wind whistling past the castle window. Of course, it's inspired by nights listening to the radio at Mike Love's house on the corner of Mount Vernon and Fairway in Los Angeles. Here's a photo of Mike at the house, which is a big 3-story place with a view of LA, and must have suggested a castle to Brian compared to the tract home they were living in down in Hawthorne. Let's take a look at exactly where Mount Vernon and Fairway is. It's marked right here with this red spot. The main north-south thoroughfare is Crenshaw Boulevard. You've got the 10 freeway on the north, the 110 to the east, and the 405 to the west. And here's downtown Los Angeles. Hollywood is up in here. Beverly Hills. Over here's Santa Monica, Venice, Marina del Rey. Over here's LAX, the airport. And then down here is Hawthorne to the south. It's really not that far from Mount Vernon and Fairway. As he had done with A Day in the Life of a Tree, the weird one from Surf's Up, Brian got Jack Riley to do the vocal, a narration in this case, with Brian doing the voice of the Pied Piper. Riley has a nice voice for the narration. Brian's Pied Piper sounds like somebody in a grade school play, and he seems to be reading it like it's the first time he's ever heard it. It's got some quirky charm, but I've got to believe the first reaction from everybody involved was, "Oh no, what are we going to do with this?" In an interview at the time it was released, Carl said, "Well, it's really different. I don't know how many people are going to appreciate it. It's not like a normal record." Jack Riley tried to pass it off as Brian once again being ahead of his time. In his introduction to the compact disc reissue in 2000, Tom Petty admitted, "Listening to it for me is a little hard. At best, I would call it weird." Once again, I won't disagree with Tom Petty. The fairy tale does evoke a kind of a magical nighttime feel, but it comes almost entirely from the music sections, which are really nice. In my estimation, Mount Vernon and Fairway has been thought of more highly since the music without the narration and dialogue first became available on the Good Vibrations box set in 1993. It's the one thing that Brian seems to have been really excited about, and he was reportedly hurt and disappointed that it was left off the album proper. Issuing it as a bonus EP with a sleeve illustrated by Brian himself seems to me like a clever way to handle it. If the fans didn't like it, it was an extra freebie that didn't detract from the album, and if they did like it, it was gravy. The mere fact that Reprise was willing to go to the trouble and expense of including this EP shows the respect and clout that Brian Wilson still commanded in the music business. Whatever else you say about it, there are only a handful of artists in rock music who could have gotten this released in this or any form. The album seems to have gotten mostly good to excellent reviews. Whether creating audio equipment, shipping it to Holland along with the band and their entourage, upgrading a studio to their specifications, and then shipping everything back made financial sense is a good question. The impulse to get away and concentrate on creating music, especially after the difficulty recording Carl and the Passions, between touring commitments is certainly understandable. They came back with a strong bunch of material, and their subsequent work in LA made it stronger. Despite the positive reviews, the album only reached number 36 on the US chart. It was an improvement over Carl and the Passions number 50, but not quite as good as Surf's Up number 29 in 1971. As discussed, the Sail On Sailor single had only hit number 79, though it did continue to get quite a bit of play on FM rock stations. Additional vocals, including more from Brian, were added to California's Saga California on March 3, 1973, for a US single release which came on April 16th. Retitled California Saga, On My Way to Sunny California, it'll peak at number 84 on June 2nd. It would be understandable if the group felt that, despite their best efforts, the progressive Beach Boys were not really gaining any appreciable momentum. And while they were probably at their height as a live act, large chunks of the audience were still spending much of the shows yelling out requests for Barbara Ann. Viewed at the most macro level all these years on, Holland can be seen as the last in a continuum of albums that began with Surf and Safari back in 1962. For many, this is the last great Beach Boys album. And while it may be too simplistic to call this the end of their artistic growth, everything that comes after the 3.5-year break that follows Holland feels like either an attempt to relaunch the Beach Boys, a reunion, a pet project spearheaded by a member of the band, or at the very least, a side project to the touring oldies band that they largely became. There'll be some good music, even some excellent music after Holland, but the thread is broken after 1973, and it always seems divorced by time and context from that central 1961, 1962 to 1973 period. I feel like the reputation of Holland has continued to grow steadily over the 40-plus years that I've seriously been following the Beach Boys. It always had a good reputation. It seems like now, for many fans, it's their favorite apart from Pet Sounds. However you judge it by what came before it and what came after, it remains a great album with fine contributions from all members of the band. It's a landmark in Beach Boy history and remains warm, fresh, and unique. I hope you enjoyed this. I look forward to your comments on this. If you did enjoy it, I hope you will check out the mini episode, number 194.1, The Geography of California Saga, and please let me know over there what you think about that. I hope you will join us next time when we resume our look at U.S. pop culture in the year 1973. Meanwhile, if you wouldn't mind hitting like, I would appreciate it, and subscribe if you haven't. Have a great week. Thanks again for watching. Take care. Bye.